Good morning, everyone from Berlin. It's a very early morning for us here, but I'm very happy that you've been able to connect and join us here at Pharma MES Asia. My name is Paul, and I'm the content director of this event. I'll be showing you some of the introductory slides that we have prepared for you. And then we'll be ready to go. I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of we.CONECT Global Leaders. We're a global business company for business conferences in the digital sphere. And we've been running events since 2011, mostly live and physical based. But since the beginning of 2019 already, we are also running a number of digital events, which of course has been amplified by the recent developments. So I'm very happy to be joining and to be moderating this event from home with you. Our team for today, that's me, of course. Evelyn will be responsible for marketing and any troubleshooting that you might need with the event app. William is responsible for our partner management. And of course, our best colleague maybe this morning is a very strong coffee to make sure that we're all alert and happy this morning. I'd like to thank our partners quickly. NNIT is supporting us as primary partner. Amazon is with us, Verum Solutions, and Lonza Informatics, and we're very happy about these partners supporting us today and tomorrow. A brief outlook on what's ahead for today. I'd like to take a look at the agenda with you. We're going to start in a few minutes with the end-to-end integration track, taking a look at where MES fits in the IT manufacturing landscape with case studies from Johnson & Johnson, Apotex, Lonza, and Biologically. And from 12 to 1, I'm very excited about the interaction also taking place in this digital event. We'll have a workshop from Pfizer on accelerating global MES programs by standardizing and automating them, and a workshop by Baxter. Handoko Yoko will discuss with you interactively how MES migration and standardization can be pulled off successfully. And after a short break, we will hear from NNIT and Samsung Biologics about MES readiness and implementation. And this afternoon will be dedicated to EBR and paperless quality with case studies from Amazon, Fresenius Kabi, Sanofi, and another workshop from Johnson & Johnson. So I very much look forward to today. I'd like to go through with you very quickly through the web app. You've all joined through the platform that we have built. And there's one particular feature that will be important for you today, which is the matchmaking. So after having completed the survey, you can go to the attendee list and look for relevant contacts there. Anyone who's of interest for you to connect, you can select. I'm selecting Mr. Handoko Yanto for the moment, and you can request a meeting. Select the meeting time on one of the 2 event days, and then send the meeting request. And once the meeting request is finalized, it will show up in the My Meetings section, and you can open the virtual meeting here to set up the meeting and talk to, in this case, my colleague William face to face. So it's a very neat tool to get the interaction going and talk to people face to face. So really make sure you set up some meetings and get the interaction going. What else can you do in the web app? You can take a look at the agenda and broadcast, which of course is important. And that's also where you can join the workshops later, but I'll have more details as we get closer to the workshop times. And then of course, you can also join the Partner Expo to take a look at what our partners have in store for you. And you can see your messages and see the attendee list. So there's plenty of things you can do in the web app. One thing as we approach the presentations, please don't be shy. Make sure that you answer, that you get your questions answered from our speakers. They're here to share their knowledge, and they also appreciate your feedback. So any questions or comments you have, just put them in the Q&A or in the chat box. So we make sure to have your feedback ready for the speakers. That's it from my side this morning. I would like to hand over to our event chair. He's the director and country head of NNIT Singapore, and I'm very happy that he's joining us today and tomorrow to guide through the 2 conference days with his expertise. Ming, very happy to have you on board, and a good morning to Singapore.
Good morning, Paul, and good morning, everybody who's attending Pharma MES Asia from wherever you are. I believe we have attendees from the US, from Europe, and all over Asia this morning with us here. And actually, it should be good night for some people in the US as well. So welcome to Pharma MES Asia. So it's a pleasure to host this event again. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers as usual. And this morning, I think I'm not going to waste time, and I'm going to let our first speaker, Priti Jauhari, come on soon. But this morning we'll be talking about we have 4 speakers lined up, and they are talking about about integration and how digitalization is transforming processes and enabling concepts like review by exception, EBR, and data analytics. So our first speaker, as I said, is Priti Jauhari. She's head of supply chain and business technology at Johnson & Johnson. Priti's topic today is from MES to value-driven analytics, connected data platforms at J&J for process optimization. And without further ado, I will hand the stage to Priti.
Thank you, Ming. So I hope everybody can hear me well. Maybe just a thumbs up would do.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
You can go ahead and share your screen.
Sure. Okay.
Super.
So everybody can see my screen? All good?
Yes.
All right. So very good morning to all of you. And as Ming briefly introduced me in, the topic that I'm going to really talk about today is how do we really set us up to successfully transition from a traditional MES setup to a value-driven analytics platform. And the key here really is, as most of our organizations, we struggle with how do we provide that connected data platform, especially in the manufacturing setup, right? And the connected visibility is a challenge, not just in manufacturing, but across the board. But I think what I'm going to focus in the next 15 to 20 minutes is really getting a sneak preview of what that means in the farm manufacturing context, right? So as you would know, Johnson & Johnson, we are, more than 50% of our class of business is into pharmaceuticals. So that's where I'm going to focus the bulk of the presentation today. And towards the end, I think, as you all know, we will have time for Q&A. So please feel free to ask any questions you might have then. Okay, so let's get straight in. And I think some of you would have seen, I'm sure most of you would have seen what the Gartner maturity model for manufacturing excellence looks like. So I think before we get into and I share my stories on how J&J as an organization has really chalked out this journey of moving from a traditional technology or processes to really connected visibility platforms, what I would like to spend some time on is to understand what the maturity model for manufacturing excellence is. And we did that as part of our organization as well. And the key part here, if we look at the Gartner maturity model, is to also identify for our individual organizations where do we stand from a maturity standpoint. So if you look at it, it's really broken down into two big chunks. One is looking at the maturity inside out, and the other one is looking at the maturity outside in. And what does that mean? When we're really looking inside out, the focus is really on operational efficiencies across our manufacturing sites. And that's where we have our manufacturing, which could be very reactive in the sense that it is pretty standalone. The next step from moving on to standalone would be that how do we bring about a site excellence, right? Where we really focus on utilization, making sure that there is cost optimization and so on, which is a little anticipating in nature. Following which we are still looking inside in, but across our various manufacturing networks to see how do we optimize and what gets produced where, right? But it's still primarily inward looking. So that's really the first part of the whole maturity curve, as you see. And then as we move towards a bit more advanced or integrated manufacturing excellence or the maturity curve is when we are talking about manufacturing really orchestrating as part of the entire ecosystem. And what does that really mean is that how well is manufacturing connected both upstream and downstream to be able to bring about efficiencies end to end, right? And I'm sure there's nobody in the call who would not have used the word end to end, but I want to make sure that we are not loosely using it, but putting in the right context. So what that really means is that how can we have manufacturing also driven in a collaborative fashion, focusing on how it is outcome or solution driven as we move up the maturity curve. And what that really means is that I'll just pick an example is, right, the classic example that we would pick is MOQs, right? And we would for long years, we've seen that manufacturing MOQs would never be as smoothless in sync with the purchasing MOQs when we are purchasing raw and packaging material, or on the other side, how well they are in sync with the transportation MOQs, and then not to even talk about how they are synced up with the whole demand sensing piece, right? Or what the real true demand is. So really making sure that we have that end-to-end orchestration as well as focusing on how do we provide the operational efficiency or excellence across the value chain and not focusing on manufacturing per se. So that's the upper quadrant, right? And I'm going to talk about J&J's journey as we move through the quadrants, what our approach has been and what the success factors have been. And then if we really move towards the topmost, which is solution driven, we really go into stuff where we are talking about personalized manufacturing for, gene therapy kind of systems as well. It's just one example of that, right? So going back again, the reason of really sharing this is twofold. One is to say that having that evaluation of where does an organization stand currently when it comes to the manufacturing excellence maturity is very critical to assess. Second is, where do we want to get to? So what is your organizational manufacturing excellence defined? So it's very critical to define that for your individual organization. And that's what we did as a first step as well. Okay. So smoothly going into this with that backdrop of really understanding or benchmarking what good or best looks like, we defined our mission or our vision for what manufacturing excellence means to us, right? And if you see without reading, the key elements here is connected digital factory ecosystem. So what we really focused on is, I think most of the organization would be very good at bringing in digitalization by functions, right? Which means we would have a lot of metrics in the manufacturing context. in the logistics context, in the sourcing context. But what is really missing is even within manufacturing, how well do we have that entire ecosystem connected end to end? And that's the biggest challenge. I don't want to say that we've kind of conquered the challenge, but I think we are directionally in the right direction. We have progressed well so far, but there's a lot to do, right? So we are not like done, dusted. And again, each organization would have different, would be at a different stage of this journey. So the critical our vision was, how do we set up a connected digital factory ecosystem to make sure that we have the automation at the right processes where we are really enhancing that operational efficiency. And then the two keywords here is really reliable manufacturing and high quality healthcare products, right? So as an organization, we have a very, very big focus on quality as well as the reliability, right? And I think these are not unheard of in other sectors as well. So that's what our vision was. And then the last piece is that how can we make sure that it's agile enough to be able to meet the customer needs at any part of this world, right? As we are touching different patients or customers. So that's the vision which we chalked out for ourselves. Okay. Let's move on. So if you have any comments as I talk through, please feel free to input it in the chat, and I'll try and look at it in between so that, you know, we're not going too far into the discussion. And if you have something very burning on your mind, feel free to put your comments in the chat box. Yeah. Okay, so as we embark this journey and really moving from the traditional MES, and I don't think I even started off with explaining MES, you know, there's a bunch of experts here. So we all would have MES in some shape and form, right? So, and if we really look at where is MES journey, right? So if we are really saying that, is MES going to be replaced, right? And there are several studies that has been done that while MES is a very solid foundation, but what we are looking at as we move on in this journey is to say that how do we leverage what we have as foundational capabilities and then really move to that advanced, you know, stage of using that and then moving towards what further value added analytics in the manufacturing space would look like. So what we started off with, and as part of this slide, is that, you know, typically when we talk about advanced technology, most companies would, you know, head straight and say, okay, let's look at what is the technology available out there which is going to solve the problem, right? And that is one thing that we all do wrong in terms of going and hitting the technology first. Invariably, one of the key things that we need to start off with is process optimization or process modeling. And what do I mean by that is, and that's what we did as well in JJ, is to really have a very solid process modeling approach, right? So whenever we go hit and say that, okay, let's go and look for technology, and we are in no dearth of different technologies existing, you know, in every field, you know, talk about actually actual execution systems or lab systems or policy systems. If you even do a search, you'll get a whole, you know, load of technologies available. But if we put even a state-of-the-art technology on a suboptimal process, we are not setting ourselves up for success. Yeah? So that is critical in identifying that upfront. So in terms of approach, I would highly recommend that we start with a process modeling approach. And what we did in J&J is to have a very robust CPI, or a continuous process improvement framework. And what that really did is to really look at our manufacturing processes in a great amount of detail to then articulate what that optimized flow really looks like. And it also helps in eliminating waste or, you know, suboptimal processes right away. So that should be the first stepping stone towards this journey, right? And defining a right process modeling approach is very critical, right? So some of the stuff that we did was to define what kind of a directional flow it should be on the manufacturing setup. How are we really doing gravity transfers, containment, segregation, and so on, right? Now, having done process enhancement, and that's when we move on to integrating what the right systems should be to complement the optimized processes. And that's where the other two building blocks or other two pieces of the puzzle come together, which is execution systems and the handling systems, right? And again, when it comes to handling systems, we've used various technologies for automated storage retrieval, the entire warehouse control systems for palletization. We've also used laser guided vehicles when it comes to the material movement and so on. And I'm sure you're fairly familiar with some of these technologies. Not to mention even IoT sensors used when it comes to warehouse operations and so on. And then on the execution system, one of the key elements is to how do we make the manufacturing process or decisions data driven, right? And for that, it is very critical to make sure that the data points that are generated as on the actual execution shop floor are integrated on a real-time basis so that we can capture those data points in an integrated fashion. And I'm going to talk about a bit more when it comes to how did we approach it from a technology standpoint, right? So we made sure that the shop floor equipments are connected on a real-time basis so that these data inputs are captured for fine-tuning, insights, and decision-making, right? Because again, any data is meaningless unless we have actionable insights out of that. And that is the whole value add when it comes to connected visibility, right? And then the last piece there on the execution system, very critical, is electronic batch record. Now, unlike a long time ago, this is not something as good to have. As we all know that, in a very regulated industry, traceability is key. So electronic batch record technology or that capability is something that, it's not a good to have, it's a must have these days, right? So that's something we absolutely looked at with focus. Okay. Okay, I'll just continue. No, if you have any questions, comments, again, feel free to, share in. Nothing so far, so I'll just keep going. Okay, so after having really looked at the process modeling, the next, what we did as an organization is to define what the technology landscape would look like, right? And again here, before I start to explain the building blocks, the key really is that we are always having a very fine balance between how do we strengthen our foundational capabilities as against really embarking the journey towards advanced capabilities, right? And I don't think we have to do one over the other. It is a fine balance of both, right? So it's critical that we have a very strong foundation. At the same time, we are investing in the right capabilities for the future, and they're all connected in a very integrated fashion, right? So how did we go about it is, if you see towards the bottom are a typical process that we would have in a pharmaceutical industry where, data is getting generated at each point as we're doing blending, granulating, tablet pressing, and so on and so forth, right? Now, this data is then connected through our automation integration layer called the AILs, right? So in short, or in layman terms, the automation integration layer is really orchestrating or controlling the execution of all the various processes, right? So the real-time data from the shop floor equipment is being captured in this automated integration layer. So it's really the execution orchestrator, if I may say so, yeah? And this is really the starting point, because if you have data in silos and it's really not being captured, at a very aggregated or integrated fashion, then we really lose the capability to have a connected visibility all the way, right? So that's the first part. Then we also have our MES systems and our enterprise data presentation layer. What does that mean? I'll talk briefly about it, right? So MES, as you're all familiar with, it essentially we'll talk about, the whole tracking and documentation of our processes as we go through the whole flow from a raw packaging to a finished good, right? And the key function here, what it is really doing is some of our recipe management, some of our business logic, and the workflow is what is stored in the MES type of systems. And when we are talking about the enterprise data presentation layer, what it helps us with is it picks the data from the automation integration layer, which is the execution data points, to then generate insights and say, how do we then bring about operational efficiencies or production intelligence or operational intelligence. So it's really going into insights and doing a bit more proactive analytics to see how can we bring about more efficiencies on the actual execution. And that's the key function of the enterprise data presentation layer, right? And then we are all familiar that in a typical manufacturing setup, we'll have a lab systems as well as the quality systems, right? And then we integrate it to our warehouse control systems, right? And then data from each of these systems will overlay with our core enterprise resource planning or the ERP system, right? Because eventually that's where you will integrate it back to the production orders, which are further input back to planning, and all the way going upstream and downstream through an MRP run to trigger how we are going to generate, the purchase requisitions or inbound, as well as how we're going to connect outbound from a finished goods standpoint. And last but not the least, as we are doing the entire building block, what is really critical is to have a very robust overlay of infrastructure. And what do I mean by IT infrastructure here is really to have the whole network storage. How are we defining the whole backup strategy, the telephony piece when it comes to a manufacturing site, right? The key I think objective of doing that is to make sure that we have high availability as well as reliability. Right? So this is very, very key, and not to mention the cybersecurity element of it, right? As you all know, it's a total topic in itself, but I just do want to make a mention because how we are connecting our manufacturing systems in a very isolated computing environment, or and different companies have different ways of manufacturing, and we also have the same at different levels of depending upon what systems we are talking about. So that's the IT infrastructure piece, which is critical to the entire foundation of the building block. Okay. All right. Moving on. Okay. So before I go into really the top more quadrant on how are we looking at the whole journey. So let's do a quick, if you're talking about, how did we move the journey? So we're moving from how are we making sure that we have MES, and when we talk about MES, most of the organization would have embarked on the MES journey, would have it rolled out on all the manufacturing sites, I would assume. But as we look at the journey, what we are really talking about is how do we progress from traditional manufacturing setup. We've looked at process optimization. We've looked at how do we strengthen our technology capability. And then let's move on and see how do we, or how did J&J also move towards that value-driven analytics, right? And the first thing that we did as part of this journey is to define our roadmap. So we know what our North Star is, or where do we want to get to in terms of what manufacturing excellence means to us. So this is not a comprehensive list. Because of the whole confidentiality, what I did was I just picked a few examples to give you a flavor of how did we go about defining the roadmap and how did we embark the journey. So what have we done so far and what future holds out for us, or what are the plans for the future, right? So quickly growing through, but it starts with, taking a step back, spending the time to define your individual roadmap depending upon what your starting point is, right? So some of the key elements that we did as part of this value-driven analytics roadmap in the manufacturing setup is to make sure that we have a very clear data ingestion strategy, right? So everything that we spoke about right now talks about how do we make sure that first we have the data captured, and that's what we talk about, the data ingestion. Now, all these might sound simple, but as you would gather, there's a lot of planning that goes behind it, right? So, but the idea is that we have a common data layer where the data is being ingested, And the next step would be really applying the business rules to come up with insights. And that's where the data curation comes in. So we made sure we have a very clear strategy in each of these boxes that you look at, which also includes the data governance piece. Okay. The next one was to also talk about when it comes to performance management. We like any organization started off with having multiple Excels to do the performance management, traditional metrics like what is the production cycle time, batch release time, and so on and so forth. And we really moved into automating those once we had the base data layer existing, right? And that also means in terms of even using technologies like systems for OEE, which is the overall equipment efficiency of of actual equipment. So different technologies or systems used there, but the key idea there is to really have automation of performance metrics, so that we are not spending the whole manual processes which are prone to errors, right? And it takes a huge amount of time and effort. We invested early on Visual Factory. For those who are not very familiar, Visual Factory is really talking about how do we have the right combination of signs and charts to disseminate the actual data points right on the shop floor in the form of, and some examples are quoted here, that how do we see the work center scheduling, right? So how do we visually look at these dashboards on the manufacturing setup? And it's critical to have some of the exception reports here to be able to quickly take corrective actions. We also had stuff like doing Gemba walks, which had a full mobility. So we have iPad, which a supervisor would do regular Gemba walks, the use of Pokayoke, and so on and so forth. And again, on the automation is really defining that MVA, which is the manufacturing value adds, where we could really bring in faster automation and modeling, right? So that's what we really spend more time on. Okay, so I'll come to the questions in a bit. Yeah. So the next. So in short, quickly, the summary, I think I'm doing well on time. So I'll probably take a couple of minutes to just summarize as we went through the whole thing. So in summary, a few key takeaways in terms of, how we approach, and probably something for you to, some of you might be able to relate to what I have just explained, and you would be on similar journey like us. And some of you would be probably, could really learn and pick from some of the sharings that is there. So again, in summary, the critical is really understanding what your current maturity level is and defining what manufacturing excellence means for you. So really defining your North Star. Start with the process modeling, and there are several tools out there like Salonis and all that we've used to extract data straight away rather than starting. But also there are a lot of frameworks, not just tools, which help in this process modeling and optimization. So I think that's key. Make sure we have the right balance of building the foundation technology capability to really enable that connected visibility as we are moving towards that end-to-end visibility, downstream and upstream. Make sure you take the time to have that value-driven analytics roadmap, right? And what I showed was really some examples out of it. And what that really means is that, we had a lot more on that in terms of how we're using the virtual reality, augmented reality, how we are really doing remote maintenance on the manufacturing, right? Which also brings in a blend of technology and efficiency and cost saving and so on and so forth. So really define your value-driven analytics roadmap. And last but not the least, while I did not really focus on this, needless to say that, none of the above would happen if, as an organization, as we are embarking on this journey, if we are not progressively building the people's skills to make sure they are future ready to be able to really work in the new technology setup, I don't think any of the things that I spoke about will really work. And I think this is a topic in itself, but I didn't want to, not cover it, because it's a very critical element that we've got to have future ready people. And I think it becomes much more critical because I believe that this advancement is a little slow more on the manufacturing setup as against logistics and, customer facing fields. So with that, I think, yeah, I'm bang on my time. I had some questions, so let me quickly look at this. Okay, so I have a question from Handoko, which says, I saw that you have different set of cycle times. Cycle times like production, release, EBR. Is the production cycle time obtained from the EBR data or from other sources? Yes, we do have, it's a combination of both. So we do have so EBR also helps with, so it's not a either or. So EBR also helps with really enabling that traceability of, what are the lead times or the cycle times across each node. So we have a combination of that. So if everything is existing in the data layer, you could pretty much pick it from EBR, right? But if you're at a maturity where you don't have it all enabled, then you would have a combination of that which exists. Okay.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, Priti. Well, I have a question for you, Priti.
Sure.
I noticed your Lego blocks and framework of different layers of technology, and I'm quite interested in AIL. In terms of AIL, I don't think that you're referring to control systems, or rather control systems, but rather maybe some kind of historian.
That's correct.
Right. So a lot of data being processed into kind of a data lake or historian, and that's being processed by MES or some other kind of intelligence. Well, how does that? And I think with and I saw that lab systems is on a separate block of its own. I think how does that? And then in the future, I guess with PAT, process analytics, all right. How does that integrate with the equipment? How do you see that actually transforming? Is that vision that you have of the blocks? Is that the future, or is that or is that going to be evolving still?
Okay, so I think if I understand your question correctly, so what we are really doing when it comes to AILs is to really have those connected to the likes of the PLCs or actual shop floor equipment, right? And I think that's what is unique from an AIL perspective. And as you rightly said, if you're looking at historian, which is really looking at the, I would say, operational intelligence or production intelligence, what additionally that brings in from an analytics standpoint is analyzing that data points coming from actual shop floor equipments to then say, how do we optimize that for a better throughput, for example, right? And then what we are, to answer your question, is that when we are looking at the next level of overlay, and that's where we are looking at Microsoft Azure to come in to pick data from different layers like lab systems, the quality, the actual MES or the historian type of systems, to look at it, and ERP, to then overlay to say that how do we do advanced analytics, right? So that's where we are directionally looking at, because that's completely next level. As you rightly said, it needs to integrate to then say, how are we providing that forward looking, or rather, I wouldn't say predictive, yeah, to an extent predictive analytics, right? To support the advanced layers. Did that answer your question, Ming?
Yes, it sure did. Very much so. Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, we can discuss about this all day.
Yeah. I mean,
we're right on time.
Yes. Okay.
No problem. Yeah. No, really. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. We're right on time. And Priti, thank you so much. Very, very interesting presentation. Hope we can catch up to discuss a bit more. I hope the audience can also reach out to you, right, directly to ask you questions directly. So I will definitely look forward to catching up with you. Very, very interesting concepts. So everybody, thank you. Thank you, Priti. We'll go on to our next presentation.